So we're going to go over functional volume and set sizes today. So truthfully, we should have gone over this, or I should have put this video out before the one on increasing work rate, because these are your guidelines for how you should be approaching your work rate, or they help you align with how to dictate your target values in terms of number of reps and volume for work rate. Nonetheless, we'll go over what functional set size and volumes are, and how we can use these numbers to guide your training and maximize your results in the sport of functional fitness. So functional volume is basically how many reps of any given movement you can expect to see over the course of an entire workout in a competition. So basically, you can expect to see, for example, between 30 and 40 ring muscle ups over the total course of the workout. It doesn't mean that there's going to be 30 straight muscle ups. That'll be functional set size, which we'll get into later. It just means that there will be about that many reps total over the course of the entire workout. So here we have our gymnastics functional volume numbers. For pulling movements, we've got muscle ups where we can expect to see between 30 and 40 reps on the ring or the bar. Toes to bar, we can expect to see 60 to 120 reps. Chest to bar pull-ups are 80 to 150. Rope climbs, usually we're seeing between 8 and 15. For our pressing movements, strict handstand push-ups, we're anywhere between 30 and 50. For our handstand walks, we're looking at 125 to 250 feet. Body weight movements, that would be considered gymnastics movements. We've got burpee variations. Usually that falls between 75 and 100. That can be like a burpee over the dumbbell, like we saw in the open most recently. It could be burpee box jump overs or bar facing burpees. Box jump overs, we can expect to see between 80 and 120. And for double unders, we're looking at 250 to 500 total reps. That number can creep up a little bit, but between 250 and 500. And then pistols, we're looking at between 60 and 120. That one shows up a little bit less frequently. And some of these movements, as a side note, tend to show up more in AMRAPs than they do in workouts that have a prescribed amount of work, 21-15-9 or 5 rounds per time. So when they show up in an AMRAP, the data can be a little bit hairy, because if you have somebody that is really good at the movement, a couple years ago there was that open workout that had sets of 100 double unders, and it was split up by relatively short amounts of weightlifting and gymnastics movements. In that workout, you could have done upwards of 800 double unders. Usually when the movements are prescribed and there's a defined amount of repetitions across a workout where we're looking at trying to complete that prescribed amount of work in a certain amount of time, or in the fastest time possible, that's when we're going to see these numbers hold a little bit more true. For our weightlifting numbers, there's a bunch of data on how many deadlifts, snatches, clean and jerks with the barbell you're going to see. Generally, I grouped them together. With your lighter weight movements, you can see 75 and up repetitions. That's stuff like 75-pound bars, maybe 95-pound bars for thrusters. For our moderate weight movements, this is going to be stuff that's cleans and snatches at 115 to 135 pounds, maybe 155 pounds. Usually those are about the numbers that things are showing up in. For deadlifts, that might be sneaking up to the 185 mark. For those moderate weight movements, probably between 30 and 60 reps you can expect to do. And then the heavier weight movements, just between 5 and 25. So it's usually those heavy squat cleans that show up, or heavy snatches. And a lot of times those show up in ladders as well. For the dumbbell snatches and single arm clean and jerks, they're usually about the same. There's less data on the single arm clean and jerk, so that spread is a little bit tighter, but I'd say it's a safe bet that you're going to be doing between 80 to 90 on the lower end, and then working your way up to 150 depending on how long the workout is. The wall balls, 150 is benchmark for the upper end of volume. You'll see some workouts that have fewer than 150, but generally 150 is a good landmark for you to be able to achieve, right? So when we use functional volume to guide training volume, to start off with, your sessions should basically let you achieve functional volume. So the first thing that you have to be able to do is just do the requisite amount of reps that are going to show up in the competition, so that your body can tolerate that amount of work, right? because it doesn't matter how fast you can do any given movement. If you can't do the amount that's required of you to do over the course of the entire workout, then it doesn't matter how fast you can go, right? Only filling, like, it would be only filling your car up with enough gas to go really fast for a quarter mile, but the race is like 3 miles long, right? And so we want to make sure that our body and our system is robust enough to tolerate the total amount of volume and ideally recover from it in a meaningful amount of time, so that if you're at a multi-event competition or if you're trying to recover between training sessions, you can tolerate functional volume and then continue to work later on in the day or later in the competition. So generally, to start, we're looking at just being able to achieve functional volume repeatedly with great execution. That just means that week over week, maybe for some movements, it can be twice a week. You're looking at trying to just achieve functional volume of those movements within a training session with really high execution. So using the ring muscle up, for example, it might start off like, hey, I just want to accumulate 30 to 40 reps at the beginning of my training session and just make sure that I can do that, right? Next, we'll start to hit functional volume with complementary interference and moderate to low intensity. So usually that looks like mixing in some stuff like maybe echo bike or some other types of movements that wouldn't really interfere too much with the target movement. So in this case, if we're using the ring muscle up, you could mix it in with some pretty easy air squats. You could do some bike, maybe some light running. It's not going to really impact the peripheral tissues involved in doing the ring muscle up, but it might add a little bit of general fatigue and bring the respiratory rate up, the heart rate up a little bit, and you can practice doing them under some fatigued context that's not going to be too overwhelming at first, right? And then finally, we want to be able to work our way up to being able to do functional volume with high intensity. So can I do 30 ring muscle ups in a workout, in a Metcon, in a competition setting, all right? So now that we know generally how many reps we're looking at doing, we want to look at how many, like how big the set size is, because that is also important for the sport. So for functional set size, it's how many reps you can expect to see in any given set in any given movement, right? And so for what this looks like is with the pulling movements for our muscle ups, both on the ring or the bar, you can expect to see 8 to 12. In some cases, it's higher. In the quarterfinal workout, there was 15 ring muscle ups. In some of the chipper style workouts, there might even be 20 or 30. But generally, what we see is that between 8 and 12 is a pretty good landmark for being able to consistently repeat sets that size, right? A common movement pairing that we see is ring muscle ups mixed with some sort of flexion movement. So a few years ago, there was the GHD and the pistol workout with ring muscle ups. In that context, I believe there were 10 ring muscle ups at a time. So if you're able to repeatedly do functional set size, and in that case, 10 is right within that range, it's going to put you pretty far ahead because you don't have to rest and take time between muscle up sets to progress onto the other movements in the workout. For toes to bar, you can expect to see 15 to 20. If you're an elite competitor, sometimes that number comes up a little bit. I've seen at the games sets of 25 to 30. Usually athletes are breaking those once they get up to that level. So I'd say being able to consistently and repeatedly do sets of 15 to 20 on the toes to bar is a pretty good landmark to know that you can reliably knock that movement out before moving on to the next thing, right? Same thing with chest bar, 12 to 20. That number is a little bit lower on the lower end. Rope climbs are usually showing up in sets of 3 to 5. This is similar to the ring muscle up. There have been workouts where it's kind of like a chipper style, and there's a quarterfinal workout a few years ago that had 9 rope climbs in a super dense set at the very end. So there's always going to be exceptions to this, but this is just like in general what you can expect. Strict handstand push-ups, 10 to 15, I think is a good landmark for being able to do sets for strict handstand push-ups. For the handstand walking, it's only 25 to 50 feet. For 25, honestly, if you're an open or a quarterfinal level worker, it's like 25 feet if you're an open or a quarterfinal athlete. Most of those competitions that are happening online, they're only going to require you to move 25 feet at a time. So really what's important is, can you do 25 feet, turn around and do 25 feet again quickly? If you are competing in person a lot, you might see that on event floors, they are pushing the set size up to 50 feet. And if that's the case, then it will be to your advantage to be able to do 50 unbroken feet of handstand walking. Burpees are going to show up in sets of 10 to 15. Again, there are examples where this number is higher, but typically 10 to 15 is a good starting point. Box jump overs are going to show up in 10 to 20, and double unders are anywhere from 35 to 100, right? That range is really big, but when you look at total amount of time it takes to do those, usually you're not doing double unders for more than a minute, right? 35 double unders probably takes about 20 to 25 seconds when all is said and done with picking up the rope, starting the set, and then finishing. And then 100 is going to take about a minute and 10 seconds to pick up the rope, do 100 unbroken reps, and then set the rope down. So these are all functional set size numbers for gymnastics. Here are the weightlifting functional set size numbers. We're looking at lightweight. You're doing anywhere from 15 to 20 reps. That can be higher if it's in a chipper. You've seen 33 for thrusters at lightweight before, but generally if you can do 15 to 20, you're probably in a good spot. I just want to reemphasize that this isn't you can do 20 unbroken lightweight thrusters one time, right? This is like I can reliably pick the bar up in the middle of mixed work and do 15 to 20 reps without setting the bar down. At moderate weights, the sets are at 8 to 15, and then heavy weights, they're at 1 to 5. This one gets a little bit convoluted because if it's a snatch or a clean and jerk, you're just doing singles, right? For the most part. And for the heavyweight especially, if it's something like maybe a deadlift or front squats, then that can be a little bit more contextual here because you might pick the bar up and want to be able to do 8 to 15 reps unbroken. For the front squat, let's say it's like 225 for moderate weight or 275 for the heavyweight, right? For at least for men's weights. The dumbbell snatch, 20 to 30 reps in general. And then the single arm clean and jerk, 10 to 20 reps, right? These are a little bit more geared towards training. I would argue that if you can very repeatedly do sets of 20 to 30 for either of the dumbbell movements and hit functional volume, you're probably not going to have any trouble just continuing to do reps or doing 30 reps, resting a couple of seconds, and then doing another 30 reps, right? If the workout shows up and it's got a super dense set. Wall balls are going to show up in sets of 20 to 40. Sometimes it can eke its way up to 50. There are chippers where it's all the way up to 150, but in general, for training, 20 to 40 is good for set sizes, and then just making sure that you hit functional volume as well. So now that you know your functional set sizes and your functional volumes, we can put a complete picture together in terms of our progression to reach a level that is contextual to competing, right? And so when we get here, we're looking to first hit our functional volume, right? So again, we'll go into examples next, but first I'd like to see people hit functional volume with great execution, right? Then once they can hit functional volume, we work our way up to functional set size. Okay, so it's another thing to be able to do 30 ring muscle ups in sets of 10. We use full rest, just allow for quality. And then once we can repeatedly hit functional set size with full rest, we want to be able to hit functional set size and volume with limited rest. So that looks like putting it against a clock using an EMOM or something like that. Once we hit functional set size and volume with limited rest, we can start to add in some moderate intensity, some complementary interference, and then finally we can sort of start to fold it into intervals and mixed work. So we'll look at the ring muscle up example here. First, we're going to accumulate functional volume. So when I write a workout like this, I'll probably say something like accumulate quality reps of ring muscle ups in a 10-minute window. Stop if you get to 30, no misses allowed. All right. The no misses forces the quality to be high and makes the athlete aware that they should be resting fully before they go to do the next set of reps. It is also encouraging them not to push every set to failure. So if they're doing unbroken reps, the goal is not to go to failure and see how big of set sizes we can get to. It's to accumulate quality reps. Again, if they get to 30, or in some cases, we can let that come up to 35 or 40 in a 10-minute window, then it's good, right? That's functional volume. There's no need to do more than functional volume, right? So next we accumulate functional set size. So now that they've proved that they can do between 30 and 40 reps, our target is to be able to do 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps with full rest in between, right? Once the athlete gets to functional volume, it's not super, so once they get to functional volume, it's not super likely that they're going to be able to handle functional set size immediately, right? If they're doing functional volume, they can probably do, at least in this context, they can probably do 40% of functional set size right? In some cases, it might be more, right? But if that's the case, that's fine. The goal then is to build them up to functional set size before moving on. So you might have them start out and start with 7 to 8 sets of 4, right? And then it might be like do 2 sets of 5 and then a few sets of 4. And then it might be do 6 sets of 5, right? And then you slowly build their tolerance for the density of the set as you work your way up, right? And then from there, once you reach the point where you can get to 8 to 12 reliable, unbroken sets with rest as little as 2 minutes, then we can start to, they should be indicating to you, or it should be obvious to you when you think you're ready. You get bored, you don't feel like you're having to rest that long, and it's just like, I feel like I'm doing the same thing over and over again. That's when it's time to move on, right? So we move on, and now it's hit it with limited rest. So we could do something like every 2 minutes for 3 rounds, do 10 to 12 ring muscle ups. So that's 6 minutes. You're getting 30 ring muscle ups done. You've got a little bit of the pinch from the clock. So in some cases, athletes might not feel like they're ready to get going, but they are able to execute. That is a similar feeling that they're going to have when they're in competition. So it is contextual. And sort of similar to the previous example, in some cases, the rest, depending on how long they're resting in between sets when they're just working here on their accumulating functional set size, once they get here, they might need to start with every 3 minutes or even every 4 minutes, and then you bring it down, right? So we're still wanting quality, but we're forcing the pressure a little bit of having to go when you're not going on your own terms, you're going on someone else's terms, right? In this case, it's the clock. Next, we can try and hit functional set size and volume with complementary interference. So complementary interference, as a reminder, is interference that it causes general fatigue, but not peripheral fatigue that will interfere with the movement itself. And so this is causing the tissues in the legs maybe to be tired. It's causing an aerobic stimulus. You're ventilating, your heart rate comes up, but you're not doing a bunch of strict pull-ups or ring dips before you go to try and do muscle ups, right? And so what this might look like is 4 sets of 20 calories on the air bike at like 70% effort, do 20 air squats, hop up, and then do between 8 and 12 unbroken ring muscle ups. So you can see here that you might be a little bit fatigued, but the ring muscle up will generally feel okay, right? Rest 2 minutes and then do that again, all right? So now we're approaching the ring muscle up with a moderate to low amount of fatigue, right? But we're still targeting functional set size. We're still getting functional volume in over the course of the piece. And then we are just practicing a little bit of fatigue, but not a ton, right? So finally, we want to hit functional volume and set size with complementary interference and intensity. Right? So what that looks like is maybe we're picking a row instead of a bike because it's going to use the lats a little bit more. Uses the midline a little bit more. And then we might do the burpee because it's going to also tax the midline slightly. It definitely stresses the triceps and the chest just a little bit, but enough to have an effect on the muscle up, right? And so we do 24 calorie row at a little bit faster pace, 12 burpees over the rowing machine, and then get up and do 8 to 12 ring muscle ups. Rest a little bit between sets. From here, I would keep athletes here if they are doing an accumulation phase. And the goal is just to drive quality and increase fitness by pushing the pace a little bit more on the rowing machine, maybe increasing burpee volume slightly. You can mix and match movements and stuff here as well. But intervals, I think, are a good place to hang out unless you're preparing for a competition. All right. Once you're ready for competition, that's when you would start to drive the other numbers. So once you're ready for competition, that's when you would look at starting to really push on tightening up the rest, really increasing the density of the mixed work, and potentially not having any rest at all and treating it like a competition simulation, right? As an overview, we're going to hit functional volume first, then we're going to work on getting functional set size done. We're going to hit our functional set size and functional volume with a limited rest, so in the form of an EMOM. Then we're going to hit functional set size and volume with complementary interferences, moderate to low intensity, and we're limiting the amount of peripheral fatigue in the associated muscle groups with the target movement. And then finally, we're going to hit functional set size and volume with high intensity and density, and then slowly start to work our way up to competition relevant pieces, right? I just wanted to note that exceeding functional volume in a training session isn't really worth the level of fatigue that it produces. And so if we're looking at muscle ups, doing 60 muscle ups in a session, I think has pretty significant diminishing returns once you reach over that 40 to 45 mark, right? The stress on the tissue you can do in a more controlled manner using hypertrophy or strength work that doesn't produce the same amount of dynamic eccentric contraction and fatigue and damaging the tissues in the shoulder and the pec, right? The same can be true for other movements as well. Once you start doing more than what is going to show up in the competition, it becomes a little bit redundant. There's no need to do more than that. What I would encourage athletes to do if you're in a spot where you can reliably do functional volumes and set sizes is increase the intensity and volume of the mixed work that you're mixing it in with, specifically the machines, because they do not induce as much fatigue, right? The framework that I've outlined here as a side note works really well for gymnastics. For weightlifting, it can be appropriate as you start to build for a competition and help you prepare for the volume and set sizes that you're going to see in a competition on the barbell or the dumbbell. However, generally, in terms of building fitness, what will drive your ability to tolerate functional volume and set size will actually be your overall strength. And so getting stronger is going to, at least in accumulation phases and far out from competition, will give you a lot more bang for your buck in terms of your training value and training efficiency than spending a lot of time doing this type of work with a barbell. I just think that you're going to have a better time if you just get stronger than if you take some of that volume away from your strength work and some of that intensity away from your strength work in exchange for doing moderate to low tension exercises at really high rates. And that's how I train my athletes, but I'm just throwing that out there. So that's an overview on functional volumes and functional set sizes. Once you have those numbers down, then I would go and look at in the previous videos on building work rate and capacity. So we want to make sure that we can tolerate functional volume and set size. And then once we get into the realm of being able to do functional volume and set size, and we're starting to fold in some of that intensity and fatigue, that's when work rate starts to become more pertinent. And we can start to look at using the framework for work rate to increase how fast you can do some of these movements. So hopefully that was helpful, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.